So, you guys can hear me. If I mumble, just shout at me. It's a bad habit. I did used to be agency spy, but the new editor is right there, so if you have any problems, he's back there. Hi, Karen. And that's not me anymore. So, but from time to time, I do pay attention to what's going on in the media, because as a journalist, you never really let go of that. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about privacy, but recent events have sort of shifted the tone of this thing. So, last December, the Tunisian revolution started when a frustrated fruit vendor set himself on fire. That man, Mohamed Bouazi, was only 26. He was the sole earner for his 8 family members, and word about his death spread quickly across the web. But the actual implications of what he had done wouldn't be realized until much, much later. Last December, sorry, actually put my page too. Back in 2009, Nida Aga Sultan was shot and killed during the Iranian election protests. Her death was captured on video and was broadcast all over the web. It was later described as probably the most widely viewed death in the history of the world. Like Mohammed, she was 26 and a little bit frustrated. She was from a middle-class family. He was from a lower-class family. In life, both were fairly powerless, but in death, they became symbols that united their countries. So let's move on. There's been a lot of activity lately. So the London riots are probably the most close to the ones that we've seen here. A man was killed by the police. It resulted in widespread outrage. That was also communicated through the web and mobile devices. That man's name is Mark Duggan. There's a picture of him here. The riots that followed Mark's death lasted about 6 days. During that time, one particular story led me to raise a concerned eyebrow to the issue of free speech, human rights, and the web, because that seemed to be what people were talking about without really talking about it. So you see, in hopes of ending those days-long riots, the British government decided that they were going to think about cutting off Twitter, cutting off BlackBerry Messenger, because these were the tools people were using to try and stay in touch, to collaborate, to get together. Now, in the case of London, these were riots. Things were being destroyed. So this wasn't a good reason for a lot of people to be using these tools. At the same time, what they were, sorry, that's a little bit far. What they were considering doing here was shutting off people's lines of communication. And that was particularly alarming to me because if they can do it in London, where their rules about speech are fairly similar to our First Amendment, they can probably do it here. Luckily, the British government kept the power switched on. Now, when this kind of thing happens, as it did in London, as it's happened in Mexico, in Egypt, in Libya, and elsewhere, we as Americans really should take notice. Because as soon as we take our own speech for granted, we've eroded our right to it. And that's exactly what happened just this summer. In July, sorry for this picture, by the way. In July, San Francisco transit police shot and killed this man. His name's Charles Hill. He was 45. After his death, protests organized by the now infamous hacktivist group Anonymous lasted for 5 days. The most chaotic events of those protests came when a group of 100 protesters tried to stop a commuter train from leaving the station. BART authorities were aware that, in this case as well, people were using the web and Twitter, BlackBerry Messenger to communicate and to coordinate their efforts. So, as in London, BART discussed turning off the internet. Now, unfortunately, they actually did end up turning off the web for a short period of time within the station. Now, it doesn't seem like a big deal. They were really just trying to save lives, right? They're trying to protect people, which is their job. At the end of the day, though, a lot of people saw that move as unconstitutional and illegal because it did limit people's ability to communicate. So what's most eye-opening about the BART protests is that they used the same tactic as the ousted Egyptian president Hosni Mubarak after thousands of Egyptians, like the ones here, peacefully converged on Tahrir Square just a few months prior. Same tactic. But as Mubarak learned, shutting off the internet only bolstered the movement that he was trying to suppress. Often in these situations, it only takes one incident to transform a protest into a full-blown revolution. Something as common as death, as we saw with Nida, Muhammad, Charles, and James, is proof that very little separates a revolution from a movement. And it's too far. This button is kind of weird. Goodbye. I think I did have it. So what we end up seeing is that people are just really trying to spread their ideas. And to spread their ideas today they're using the web to do it. They're using their mobile phones, they're using Twitter, they're using Facebook, anything available to them, really. When those devices and tools get shut down, they tend to return to actively protesting in the streets, or when they just get so frustrated that talking about these things on the web doesn't really do it for them anymore, then they take this to the streets. You've probably heard about websites that the government runs getting shut down and Twitter accounts getting hacked and all this information being sort of messed with. It's due largely to protests. Occupy Wall Street is one of the best examples at this point. What started as a series of denial of service attacks, soon transferred to the streets of some 30 American cities. This is happening right now, as you all know. So though some claim this movement is without formal demands, the 99%, who is sort of the body of this group, they're telling the world that they're tired of being bystanders in their own lives, of being slaves to their debt, and of not having enough money to see a doctor. So one interesting thing here, and you may see some of these pictures sort of trends around the web. It's like a message about something, and then at the end it says, I am the 99%. So this is an 18-year-old girl who says, I'm 18, I haven't been to the doctor since I was 14, and I don't know what I'm going to do when the money is gone, indicating there that her parents are also having financial issues. Here's another one that is a little bit more drastic. I have a master's degree and a full-time job in my field, and I have started selling my body to pay off the debt. I am the 99%. These are just a couple people who support Occupy Wall Street. On Saturday, 700 more were arrested while trying to cross the Brooklyn Bridge. This has been big news. This was following 2 weeks of protests down on Wall Street, again organized by Anonymous, just blocks from where we are today. The 99% are all around us, and they're probably in this room right now. Promise this is going to make sense in a second. So what can we as marketers take away from understanding the cross-section of speech, human rights, and the web? Do we as communicators have a role in protecting people's rights to free speech, and what are the consequences if we don't? How should tech companies and communications companies respond when governments require them to shut down the internet? How do we as an industry protect the very rights to speech that we rely on every day to spread our own messages? As web communications companies, the point is, we're going to be dragged into these issues anyway. We've seen Facebook, we've seen Twitter and Vodafone and a number of them all pulled into this topic, even though they probably would rather not be. So it's more important now than ever to understand these issues and to get ahead of them and figure out how to really respond. And hopefully we can do that in a way that doesn't see these as a risk to our brands, but as an opportunity to show our customers that the communications industry supports their rights, which at the same time are our rights. So if you're wondering how to sort of learn more about this, I know in the news it seems right now like it's sort of this blind movement. We don't really know what's happening. There are people working on this and who have been working to solve these problems for a while. At the end of the month, Facebook, Google, Yahoo, Skype, Mozilla, AT&T, and a number of the world's leaders in tech activism, human rights, policy, they're all getting together in San Francisco for what's called the Silicon Valley Human Rights Conference. It's going to be attended by companies like Gap and Twitter, the New York Times. Robert Scoble will be there, Craig Newmark, and one of the more notable figures, Assistant Secretary of State Michael Posner. This event is meant to help tech companies understand how to approach the topics while maintaining the fundamental human rights we as Americans are bound to protect. You can learn more at rightscon.org. Just to wrap up, if the events of the last year have taught me anything, it's that the process of social change starts with protest in the streets and with free speech. In the US, we have it pretty good. We haven't really needed to unite behind anything huge in a long time. I think the 60s is the thing that people think about the most, certainly in my generation, when people came together to incite change. And it happened. And I think at the time, the people who were sort of wondering why this change was needed couldn't really understand what the issues were. And I feel like a lot of us have that situation now because it is sort of vague. But protesters in DC today just announced that they want campaign finance reform. So there's something. But what else? What is New York trying to say? What's Denver saying? What's Austin saying? What's Houston? LA? What are they trying to get at? There's something wrong. And we can't really identify it, I think, because it's different for everyone. So what I want to ask you guys today is just to be aware of this. Just try and understand it. Try not to limit it to, well, they don't have a cause. Try to understand where people are coming from because if we don't, we we risk losing our own rights to free speech, I think, when we don't listen to what others are trying to say. So the last thing is, today as Americans are fighting for their rights to speak, right now the web is opening up more opportunities for them to do that. And as communications and information companies, it's our responsibility to understand these problems. The last question I want to pose for you today is, how will you as communicators for hire respond? Thanks, and have a good afternoon.